Okay guys, so here we are at the workbench and we've got our TSU-2200 for EMD diesel, and that's going to have the EMD 710 that we're going to be installing into the SD70. Now, I believe on this MTH model, there's a place for two speakers right here at the bottom. So we've got two of our 28mm round speakers that we're going to install into the floor of the body. So now we're going to grab our instructions. Now this is a DCC ready unit. This is not a sound unit. The sound conversion on these is a little bit more complicated than what we're going to do here. So please call us and I'll give you some overview of what's involved in that. But the first thing we need to do is look at the instructions here and find out how to take the body shell off so that we can get access to the circuit board. Now, when we're doing that, you're going to see this page right here, and here is a diagram showing the 8-pin socket that we're going to solder the wires to, and then where to solder each of the different lighting wires that you're going to be using for this to match up the various things. So you have the ditch light LED, and then you have number board LEDs, DCC lighting control for number boards. So we'll have to look and see what all these mean, and we'll figure it out here. So take a look at this and we will get started on here. So let's go. Okay, so to remove the body shell, first we're going to remove the handrails on the front of this locomotive off of the nose here, and we can grab them with our pliers and gently pull them. We're going to set them aside so that way we don't take a chance at damaging them. It's trying to come. There we go. All right, now we need to remove these handrails. In this case, the handrail stanchions are going to pop off of the metal handrail here. So we're going to have to take a little care here with some multiple tools to make this happen. There we go. So we just need to release it from the cab. This part here is going to come up with the body shell. So these three stanchions need to be released, and the rest of these will stay. Now we do the same thing on the other side with these ones up here on top. So we need to pull it out, and we just need to pop them out. They're just press fit. The metal stanchions are basically wrapping around the metal wire. There we go. Okay, now on this model, there are 4 tabs, one here, and then the same place on the other side, one here and one there. And what we have to do is we actually have to get on the inside of these tabs and force them outwards, and the body shell just pops right off. So after we've removed these out of the way, you can see how that's coming up with the body shell. And now we just gently set that aside. So now we have our circuit board right here. Turn this around. Now you can see the circuit board here. We have our NMRA 8-pin plug, so we're going to use that to solder in. And then we're going to double check the wiring on these. I'm going to read the instructions here in just a second and confirm which tabs that I'm supposed to solder the extra lights to, so that way we can control the number boards and the independent ditch lights on the front. So on this 8-pin plug, these jumpers just lift right out, and you can take those, set them aside, toss them, throw them at the cat, whatever you'd like to do. Now if we look at this, there's no labeling as far as which one is number 1, but that's where our diagram in the manual here. So pin 1 is right here. So what we're going to do with our decoder on this particular install is we're going to trim the wires short. We're going to tin the end of the wire. We're going to stick it into the hole and solder it in place. So I'm going to go through, read through this, and you can see a screenshot of this here. And it'll talk about what each of these different pins are for, how to use them, and we will fire it up and see what it does. So we'll be right back. Okay, so here we are. I have our NMRA 8-pin plug drawn out and oriented to match the circuit board that's here in front of me. Now we're going to be mounting this decoder right here, so we don't need very much length on these wires. So we can go ahead and cut these wires about right here. The exception I'm going to leave off is the green wire and the brown wire, because we're going to use those for the extra lights. So the rest of these are going to the NMRA 8-pin plug. We're going to cut them off about there. We're going to solder them directly to the board. So let's get our cutters. And there we go. Now we can take these extra wires and store them in the parts bin or what have you. Now what we're going to do is we're going to get our wire strippers, which are right here, and we're going to strip the insulation off the end of these wires, just like this. And we're going to strip and tin the ends of these wires, and these wires are what's going to go into the holes. We're going to solder them in place. So I'm going to show you the process on how we do that. So we just go through and we just strip the insulation off the tips of each of these. Remember, you don't need to strip very much, just about 1/8 of an inch or 1/16 of an inch, just enough that gives us something to tin, because we're going to end up probably trying to cut these a little short once we tin the ends of the wires. There we go. Now what we're going to do is we're going to gently twist the ends of each of these wires. And what we're doing by twisting these is we're just trying to make sure there's no frayed wire or loose errant wire that potentially could be causing a short later on down the line. This red one seems to want to give me some trouble, so there we go. All right, so with these wires all twisted, we're ready to tin. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take our flux. Now this one is one I use here. You guys have seen this before. Chip Quick SMD 291. I get this from DigiKey. It's relatively inexpensive and it works well for microelectronics. So, oops. All right, so let's put a little bit of flux on each of these. All right, so now we're going to get our soldering iron. We're going to get our solder on the end of the tip. We're going to first clean the tip off. All right, and we have a little bit of solder here. So remember, it doesn't take a whole lot of solder to tin the ends. Just a little tab. And especially since we're going to be putting them in holes, you want to make sure that you only put a little tiny bit of solder on the end of each one, because if you have more solder on the end of these wires, then it's going to make it a little harder to fit into these holes. And there we go. Okay, so now we're going to work our way across this way. So we're going to start with these two that are the farthest away, pin number 5 and pin number 4. So to start off, we're going to use pin number 5. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the gray wire here, grab the wire here with my pair of tweezers, and we're going to gently insert the wire into the NMRA 8-pin socket here, just like that. Now we're going to get a little bit of solder on the end, and because we dabbed a little bit of flux in there, the flux is just going to flow out of the circuit, or out of the soldering iron and into the joint here. All right, there we go. So now we're going to do the next one. So pin number 4 is the black. So we're going to take our black wire. We're going to gently insert it into the hole here, just like that. Get a little solder on the end of it. And we're just going to carefully solder it in place. Just like that. And now you work your way across. So the next one would be the white wire, which is pin number 6. Since I'm right-handed, it's easier to work from front to back and then right to left. So that way I'm always got the soldering iron instead of trying to put it on the other side of all these wires. All right, so now that we've got our NMRA 8-pin socket wired up, Now we're going to mount the decoder here using some double stick foam tape. So we're just going to take, where'd it go? There it is. We're just going to take a small piece of foam tape. And let's cut a fresh edge on that. And just like that, we can pull this out, mount it on top of the circuit board, peel off the backing, and our decoder will fit flush right there, just like that. Now, the hard part, as we talked about, is to address the extra wires for our ditch lights and so forth. So we have these 3 terminals here on the end. So we have ditch light right, ditch light left, and then the number boards. Now, because we're going to solder these, they provide a small little black plastic clip that resides over this. We've lovingly known these things as called as snoods. But honesty, the soldering is going to be a better job. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and remove these things, get them out of the way. I'm going to take these things off, take them out of the way. Okay. Okay, we're not going to use these anymore. So now we're going to take our wires and solder them. Now the FX3 wire is our green wire, the FX4 is our brown wire, and then for the number boards we're going to use FX5, which is our green and white striped wire here off the back. So we're going to undo the wire harness here. We're going to fish out the green wire with the white stripe out of this wire harness. And now we're going to solder this one to the number boards. So we can go ahead and do that now. So again, we don't have very far to go, as you can see here. So we're just going to cut the wire short and take this excess wire and set it aside with the rest of it. Now we're going to get our wire strippers, and we're going to strip and tin the end of this wire also. Just like that. So again, we're going to twist the wire to make sure there's no frayed edge. Use our flux. We're going to get some solder on the end and tin the end of the wire. And there we go. Now we can solder this directly to the pins on here. So what we're going to do here is we've got a little excess. So I'm going to cut the end of this so that the wire's a little shorter. I'm going to put a little flux on the tab, just like this. Yes, you can go through hole, but you don't need to. So in this case, I'm not going to. We're going to form the wire to fit flat on the top. I'm going to grab my soldering iron, put a little solder on the end of it, and then we're just going to solder it in place. Just like that. There we go. Now we're going to do the same thing for the left and right ditch light. So in all honesty, green wire, brown wire, it doesn't matter which is left, which is right, since they're both going to be wired up and programmed to illuminate together. So I'm just going to keep these on the same side. So we're going to run this wire just like that. And you can see that we're going to cut it short right there. And we're going to strip and tin the end of this wire as well. So we're going to do the same thing right here. Put some flux down on the joint. So we're going to get our soldering iron, get some solder on the end of the iron here, tin our wire. Now when we put it in place here, because I put flux on the end, we're just going to put our solder down. And there you go. Now we're going to do the same thing to the other side. Turn our model around, move our wires out of the way here, estimate our length of wire, cut it short. Strip and tin the end of the wire here. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing here. And just like that, our wires are installed. Okay, now we have our left ditch light, right ditch light, and number board wire. Now, according to the instructions, it said if we want the extra lights, we need to remove these clips, these little jumpers. So in order to do that, we're just going to grab these little jumpers here off the side of the board. Just like that. We're going to take that out. And there's another one on this side as well. And by removing this jumper, now we should have control of those ditch lights by our decoder. So at this point, we can go test everything, make sure it works. Again, we haven't hooked up the speaker yet. So let's make sure the lights work, we have control of it, and we'll be right back. Okay guys, here we are at the test bed. We're just going to double check. So we've got the layout powered up. We see our blue pilot light on the side of the decoder that tells us track power is applied. Let's check it in the forward direction. We see our models moving. Okay, let's check the reverse direction. Reverse direction seems to work just fine. Okay, now we're going to be in forward direction. We're going to turn on our headlight. We can see that we have a light control. Now we're going to go in the reverse direction and check the headlight or the reverse light, and it's coming on. Okay, let's check our front lights here. So first, we're going to check the front ditch light. Well, it looks like right now I've only got one ditch light turning on. Let's try the number boards. We can see the number boards are working. So we've got to figure out why we only have one ditch light. So let's go back to the drawing board. Let's go back upstairs, check the instruction sheet, and make sure any jumpers that needed to be pulled are pulled and any jumpers that need to be replaced are replaced. Okay guys, we're here back out on the layout, and I want to show you what I found so far. So there's a housing that holds this circuit board in place, and this is where the ditch lights originate. Now, after an unsuccessful call with the folks at MTH, they swear they've never installed a decoder into a model before, and even went so far as to try to accuse the decoder of being bad. At that point, I threw out who I was and why I was calling, and he had nothing else to say. So here we are back, but I want to show you this interesting thing. After I take the circuit board out, when I turn on the zero, let's see here, when I turn on the zero function, look at that. I get one ditch light to light up and the headlight. And then when I turn on function 25, the other ditch light comes on. So there's some interesting things going on here. I'm going to look at the electronics a little further, see if I can figure out what's going on, and get right back to it. Okay, so I'm back here at the workbench, and there is a convenient little 4-pin plug that does our wiring. So we're able to look closer at this LED circuit board. So in order to guarantee this thing works, we can bypass the 8-pin plug, and we can actually bypass this circuit board. What we're going to do is we're going to desolder the brown and the green wires, and we're going to add our 1000 ohm resistor, and we're going to run them directly to this model. So there's a 4-pin connector here, as you can see. We're going to trace those wires. We're going to disconnect them from wherever they go, attach them to the appropriate leads to the decoder, and that does include splicing into the blue common. So we'll have to fish that out and splice into that. So to test for this, we've got this circuit board here in front of us. Now I'm looking at the labeling here, and we're going to try to bring it a little closer here for you to see. And you'll see that this one here is labeled with the plus, and you can see a trace running from here to this. So that assumes that's a minus. So to test for this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a LED tester, and this is just a 9-volt battery that has a resistor wired into it right here with a standard 9-volt clip and alligator clips on the end. So we're going to touch this to the positive side, and then we're going to touch the other one to the other side, and look, our LED lights. So that gives us confirmation on what we need to do. Now we can do the same thing for the other side. We can look closely and we can try to see which ones are positive here. So I think this is maybe what we need to do. Nope. It almost looks like this is going to be the positive here. And then we connect our negative to here. No, still nothing. There we go. So here's our other lead. So for some reason, now let's test just for grins. We're going to test this one here as negative. We're going to test this one here as positive and see if it illuminates. And it doesn't. So there's 4 wires to this circuit board. But as you can see, there's one common that's a negative here. And then we have 4 wires going back. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to cut some traces here and try to do some separate soldering. So let me investigate, see how we can break this up, because as we mentioned, MTH uses a common negative and the positive leads are separated. So what we need to do is we need to make sure we have separate negative control for each LED. So let me work on this and I'll be right back. Okay guys, so here's a summary of what I found. On this LED over here, this one is the left ditch light. There's a trace that runs all the way over to this, which is our common negative. This extra brown wire here doesn't do anything. So what I did was I gently scraped and made this small copper strip part of this trace visible. And then I took my knife and cut a gouge and a groove through the circuit board here to cut the trace and insulate this negative from this negative. So now they are completely separated. So take a look at the illustration and you can do the same thing. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this brown wire and move it from the back of the circuit board to the front of the circuit board. And I'm going to solder to this trace very carefully here. And this is where your soldering skills are really going to show to make sure that you've got just enough solder on the end of that, but not so much that it's going to peel this up. So I'll be right back. I'm going to get my little dab of flux on the end here. We're going to put a little dab of solder on the end, and then we're going to put that on the trace. There we go. Now we're going to take our wire that we've got here, and we're going to very carefully solder it now to that bit of solder that's on the circuit board. And there we go. So now we're going to very carefully bend this around. All right, so there's our finished soldered circuit board. Oops, it's got a little solder peak here. We're just going to knock that down. There we go. Okay. Now, as you notice, this wire is going up and around and over the circuit board. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a file and very carefully file a slot right here so that it will give our wire room to come through. So now we take our circuit board, we put it back in place, and if everything lines up right, we should be able to put this in. So now our wire comes up through the slot that we've filed into here. Our PCB sits flush. So now we know that our two brown wires that are coming out are going to be my left and right ditch light, and the green and the blue wires are going to come together as a function common. So we can put this back in place. And again, this just presses down. So we line this up with these holes that mount the circuit board, that mount this in place, and we just gently press it down. And there we go. Now our lighting circuit board is reinstalled. Now we can plug back into our 4-pin connector. But again, you want to make sure you remember which wires are what. So now you notice the wire colors change. So we're going to have to trace those wires down, and we're going to solder them to the appropriate place on the other side. So to do that, again, we get our trusty tweezers, and we can pull this mess of wires out because we can tuck these all back in. And you'll see that it appears that these 4 wires are going into another 4-pin connector right there. So this is where we're going to be able to save a little bit of space. We can trace these wires down, and you can see they're going into this big plug header here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take these 4 wires and we're going to cut them at the face of this so that we can get it out. So I'm going to unplug this plug here. You get a better tool for that. This is a fairly solid plug. The reason we're doing this is to make sure that there's no loose wires that potentially could cause problems later. There we go. So now we have this giant harness here. We've got our 4 wires, and we're going to see where they go. All right, so we're going to cut these wires as flush as we can. Again, double check, make sure these are the only 4 wires going to, and they are. So we're going to cut. Now remember, in some cases, in this particular one here, you can see where 2 wires are going into the same plug. So we just need to make sure that we only cut the one that we need to remove. So there's 1. And we have 2. If I can get it. 2. 3. There we go. So now I have our 4 wires removed. Make sure that these wires are not touching anything, and because there is going to be some remaining wire back. So we're going to make sure all this is separated, make sure it's not touching anything. And then we're going to fish these wires out of this knot. And then we can plug this harness back in. Let's see here. Let's get a tool that I can use to help me line this up a little better. There we go. And remember, this is a snug fit here, so make sure this plug is fully seated in. And I think we're there. So now we have our 4 loose wires, and we know through this connector that the 2 brown wires, of course, go to separate brown wires, or separate wires. One's brown, one's black. So this is where we get to trace a little bit further here. And we want to make sure that we have our correct wires. So again, we grab our tweezers, and we can grab this outer one is where the 1 brown wire goes. We have 2 brown wires. We have a black wire and a purple wire. All right, so our purple wire also goes to the outer one. So this one and this one are our leads to the ditch lights. That means these two leads here are going to be the ones going to the function common. So again, we don't have to have as much, we don't need to keep this second plug if we don't want to. We can pull this through, kind of tuck this in. Okay, they were going to have this plug up here because there's plenty of space here inside this nose, so we can leave those up there. So what we'll do is we're going to pull these wires back like this just so we can make our connections, and then we'll bring that back down. Because again, we don't need this 4-pin connector here. This is redundant. We're going to go ahead and remove this. So we're going to take our cutters. And remember, we know which wires are which. This one and the purple. And then these two go together. So let's test this theory. We're going to get our wire strippers. We're going to cut the ends off of this. All right, these two should go together. So the center brown and the black wire should go together. And again, we're going to test our theory. So we have this brown wire. We're going to get our LED tester. We're going to hook up the red to the function common. And then we'll hook up the brown to this LED. And as we can see, we have one ditch light illuminated. And when we move our black wire over to the purple wire, we have the other LED and ditch light illuminated. All right. So now comes the tricky part, because we need to splice into our blue wires, and then we're going to add resistors for these. So what we need to do is we need to fish out our blue wire here and see just how much space we have. And as you can tell, we don't have a very long piece of wire here. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to desolder this out of the 8-pin socket. This will be a little tricky. There we go. All right. So now we have our blue wire freed. And what we're going to do is we're going to tie in some of the other blue wire here that we took from before. All right, I'm going to trim the end of this and restrip it. All right, so now tie these together. We're going to solder this to the brown and black common wires. So we're going to put our heat shrink tubing over the joint. Okay, we're going to get our flux, put a little bit of flux here, put a little bit of flux here. Okay, now we're going to make our solder joints. So we're going to tin the ends of these wires together. Get a little bit more. We're going to tin these ends together. Okay, now we can actually trim a little bit of the end off on both of these because we don't need quite as much. Now comes the hard part. Be holding these wires together while we solder them together. I think we're good. All right, now we have our wires soldered together. Now we're going to slide our heat shrink tubing over the joint. Make sure all the wires are properly insulated. And I know this is tough to see from that camera angle, and I apologize, but I wanted you to see what we're doing. So here's the finished joint. You can see now we have our two blue wires over here. We have our brown and our black wire for our function common to the ditch lights here. And then now we can take this wire and we're going to solder it into the blue wire pin there where it belongs. So again, we're going to cut this wire short. We're going to trim the, or we're going to strip the end, twist the ends together. Because now the trickier part on this one is we're soldering into a hole that already has the solder in it. So we have to make sure that this part is done properly. Now, if you're watching this fully before you do this, this is a good step to do before you find the problem. All right, so now we've got that. Now we can trim off a little bit of this excess lead here. All right. Now we're going to take our tweezers, we're going to hold our wire in place. And now we should be okay to be able to get in here and do this. So there we go. It's probably not the best joint I've ever done, but you can see that it is in there. It does fit, and we're good to go. So now we have these two extra wires for our functions that we need to use. So what we're going to do here, move these wires out of the way. Here's a tip for you guys. Get some self-closing tweezers and you can hold wires out of the way all the time. So now we're going to take our soldering iron, desolder our brown wire, and desolder the green wire. And now we're going to connect these to these two wires with resistors. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and we'll come back to you in just a second. Okay guys, here we are. We're on the layout. Let's test out our left ditch light, or I guess the right ditch light. Then let's test out the other one. Hey, look guys, we got them both working. And they're independently controlled, so we'll be able to make them alternate and flash. So now let's go upstairs, install the speakers so we can get some sound and button this thing up. Okay, now we've got our Locomotive upside down, and there's going to be two tabs that hold the speaker halves together. So we may need to get a small knife, reach in here and release the first tab. And then we'll come over here on the other side and release the second tab. There we go. All right, why is this speaker why is this fuel tank half not coming out? There we go. There we go. All right, so now we've got that out. Now we can take these 28mm speaker housings and we can take them off of the model. Let's see what we got in here. Okay, so inside the model we have this speaker and the housing, and these go together, and this is what encloses the speakers inside the model. And we have one in each, the front and the rear. And we can use one or 2 of these speakers. And in this model, we're going to go ahead and use both. So as you see, we've got a lot of purple wire here, but we need to wire these up in series. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and get some purple wire. We're going to attach it to our speakers, and then we're going to feed it up into the model, and then we'll do the series wiring up there. So I have 2 of our 28mm round speakers that we're just simply going to take out. Okay, so let's get some wire. We're going to solder some lengths on here about 3 to 4 inches long, because like I said, we can always cut it shorter. So I'm going to put a pair of wires on each end of these speakers. I'll be right back. Okay, now that I've got these wired up, I wanted to point out that in this case, I'd used 2 different purple wires. One of them was purple wire that we sell in 10-foot rolls, and the other was some purple wire I had from scrap from a leftover project. But you can use 2 different color wires, because when we wire these speakers in series, we want to make sure that we know which wire is positive and which wire is negative, or we defeat the purpose. So now that we've done this, we just simply put our speaker in place. We take our speaker baffle, the back of it, we thread our wires through the hole. And then now we can just simply snap this in place. Now, if you want, you can put a dab of silicone, or you can put a gasket inside of there, but the speaker seems to be pretty secure. I would recommend putting a gasket on the face of this so that way it holds in place. So we're going to do that. Okay, now once we have our speaker, we're going to adhere the gasket that's going to hold it in place in the floor of the baffle. So we're going to take our X-Acto knife, and we're very carefully going to reach in and try to peel one side or the other off of the gasket. Now once we figure out where the gasket is, we peel the backing off, and our gasket sticks to our knife blade. So now we put the gasket on the face of the speaker very carefully, taking time to make sure it's placed properly. And then we simply pull our knife out. Now we go in, and we're just going to peel the backing off of our gasket. There we go. Now we're going to place it in the housing. Now when you're looking at this speaker housing, you notice there's a notch right here, and this is going to be lined up to the outside of the fuel tank. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that, because we're going to thread the wires up through the middle, that we align our speaker accordingly. So with our gasket in place, we're going to take the wires, we're going to put them on the far side of the speaker, or far side of the baffle on the inside here, just like that. Now we take our speaker wires, we take them together, we thread them through the opening here in the speaker baffle top, just like that. And now we can just put this in place. Now, if you wanted to, you can put a dab of liquid plastic cement around the edge. I don't think it's necessary, because remember, when we put this in place, the sides of the fuel tank hold this steady pretty good, so I don't think it's necessary. So we're not going to do it. So now with both sets of speakers ready to go, now we're going to take our model, and we're going to thread the wires up through the side here, where I believe we're going to mount these, we're going to run these speaker wires up through the holes here next to the motor wires on the front. And we can reach over here. We're going to grab them and bring them all the way up through the top. I gotta find where the other speaker wire went. There it is. that's in there. There we go. Okay. Now we'll worry about the final routing when we get everything put together. So now we can put this speaker in place just like that. Now we're going to repeat the same for the back. Again, we're going to find our routing for the speaker wires here. Now we're going to pull these wires aside like we did before with our self-closing tweezers to get them out of the way. Here's one wire, and here comes the second wire. All right, so now we got that ready. And, oops, went in crooked, hang on. There we go. All right, everything is lined up, so now we can put our fuel tank halves back in place. So we've got one half there. And then now we have the other half. We make sure they're securely snapped, and now our speakers are in place. So now what we want to do is we want to make sure our wire is routed up and through the side here to make sure that it doesn't interfere with the fit of the shell on the side of the model here. So we're going to route it up and under, and then we're going to tie it in series to our purple wires. So we're going to route the wires up here first, and we'll be right back to finish this up. Okay, so now we're going to route our wires up into the body shell here so that they're not interfering with the fitment of the shell. So we're just going to simply reach under here. We're going to snap our circuit board loose for a moment. We're going to simply pull it aside. Now, if you look closely, we have a slot here that we can route wires. We have a slot right here that we can route wires. So we're going to run the wires up through there, and then we'll route them around the circuit board. So taking our tweezers, we're simply going to carefully try to route wires into this place here. There's one. Now we're going to get the other one up and through. And again, patience is going to be your key. So I'm going to finish this up, and I'll come back to you here in just a second when it's finished. Well, guys, it looks like we've got sound. We got our headlight. We got one ditch light. Got our other ditch light. And we got our number boards. Check the backup light. So all the lights are lit, guys. It looks like everything's in place. So let's take it upstairs. We've got some sound. Make sure it's moving. Oops. Had the mute on. So we're going to start moving in the forward direction, and as you can see, everything's working. So let's go upstairs, button it up. Okay, so now that everything works, we know everything is good. Now all we got to do is put the body shell on it. But first what we're going to do is we're going to take some tape and kind of tuck down some of these wires a little bit, just to help clean it up a little bit and make it look nice. So the first one we're going to do is over here on the front, where we've got all these excess wires over here. Put a little piece of tape right about there on the body shell, or on the body frame, I mean. And tuck these wires in. I'm going to reach the tape around, and there we go. We got all this tucked in here into this space. Now we're going to do the same thing over the back here, where we've got our speaker wires, and as I mentioned, the extra lighting output wire. We're going to tuck those up. So let's get the tape here, cut another piece. And we're going to tape it on the side here. Now we're going to put our wires under, pull it around, and secure it. Now when you're doing these tape to tuck these wires in place on the frame, make sure that you're not taping to any moving parts or mechanisms. Sometimes you'll see on the side of a model here where the flywheel comes out. So just make sure when you're taping that up that you have all of that secure. And then the last thing is make sure that your tape doesn't actually come out onto the visible part of the model down here, like where the walkways are. So all right, so that's it. Now we just take our body shell and we just need to carefully make sure we go between these handrails. Make sure that the handrails come out because we're going to put those back in place here. All right, so I have to tuck to make sure these tabs get stuck into the slots where they're supposed to. Do the same thing on the front here. Okay, so now we've reapplied the shell exactly in the exact opposite way. We've pushed the shell down, we've put our tabs in place, and we've got these grab handrails on the nose back installed. So let's take it downstairs. We'll take it for a last minute test ride, and then we're also going to set a couple of CVs, including the address, and we're going to play around and get it set up so that we can have a great sounding model. So let's head downstairs. Okay guys, so here we are but down on the layout. As you can see, all the lights are lit. The one thing I have noticed is one ditch light seems to be a little brighter than the other. Unfortunately, there's nothing I can do about that. That's the way the ditch lights are designed, but they are wired the same as we did before. Other than that, we're going to make these alternating flashing ditch lights, and we're going to go ahead and dim the number boards just a little bit, and we're going to address it. So first thing, right now we're set up on Locomotive 3. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to program this on the main line. We're going to change the address. So I'm going to put my power cab here in the screen, and what we're going to do is we're going to push the program button. We're going to program on the main line. Program Locomotive 3. This is the only address 3 we have on the layout. Now we're going to push the 1 for address. Now it's going to ask long or short, and that's basically a 4-digit or a 2-digit. And we're going to set it to a long address. So we're going to push the 1. Now it's asking us our address, and this locomotive is 4006. And now we're going to press the enter. And you can see that now we're controlling Loco 4006. And you can see that we have full control of our locomotive again. So now what we're going to do is we're going to program alternating flashing ditch lights. So as we know, these are wired to FX3 and FX4. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take CV51, which is the CV to set up the lighting effect for the FX3. Now we're going to select a value of 9 for our type 1 ditch light. We're going to add 64 to enable crossing logic, and then we're going to add 128 to enable this to be an LED. So what we're going to do is we're going to take CV51, we're going to set it to a value of 201, and now we're going to take CV52 and we're going to add all that together, but in this case we're going to add 32 so that we have phase B. So that's going to give us a value of 233. Now when I exit out of my programming mode and I blow my horn, you're going to notice that the alternating flashing ditch lights are enabled. Now we can slow the flash rate down. We're going to program that in CV59. So we're going to program CV59. I believe the default value is 4. So I'm going to set it to a value of 6, which should slow it down a little bit. So now when I blow the horn, you can see that the flashing ditch lights are a little slower. Now FX5 is where we've wired the number boards, and we're going to dim those a little bit. So we're going to program CV53, And we're going to set that to a value of 19 for on-off brilliance 1. And then we're going to add 128 to that value. So that'll come up with a total of value of 147. So we're going to program CV number 53 to a value of 147. Now you see that the lights have dimmed a little bit. And now I can use CV61 to adjust the brilliance. So I can take this up to 255. And you can see how bright they got. But I think that's a little too bright. So we're going to take CV61. We're going to set it to a value of 175. And I think that looks pretty good from right there. So now, of course, the last few things we're going to do quickly on this locomotive. Obviously, this is an SD70 ACE, and we've been listening to an EMD 567. So we're going to take CV123. And referring to the sound selection reference, you can see that a value of 8 selects the EMD 710 G3 T2 prime mover, which will be the correct sound for this one. So we're going to take CV123 to a value of 8. You're going to hear that prime mover instantly change. You hear the air start. And now we have our SD70 ACE prime mover. Now the other things you can change are the horn, the electronic bell, things like that. You can go through that sound selection reference and make the choices. The last thing I do want to do to this really quickly though, before we button this install up, is we're going to add a little bit of reverb here to the air horn. So we're going to take CV233, we're going to set it to a value of 4, and that's for light echo. Then we're going to take CV161, we're going to set this to a value, I believe, of about 150. Now let's listen to the air horn. You can hear a little bit more presence in the air horn, signifying the atmosphere. So guys, I hope this installation has been helpful for you. Hopefully this will help you in your future installations. Feel free to reach out to us at SoundTraxx.com if you have any further questions, and we'll be happy to help anything we can. Thank you.